this is difficult. Let me think strategic about this, right? I think, okay, well, right now, obviously, it's a little bit difficult to put this into perspective. Well, at least for you to understand my perspective, because I only have one song out, and it's not really, well, it is a song, but like, it's not the original version of the song, right? That'll come later. I would say, I don't know, I think maybe, just maybe, if I can pull 3 songs together, maybe 4, right? The original version of Stop Playing Around, and then 3 other songs, one that were to come on an album, and the other 2 is just like a, gratuity, right? I think someone I would love to open up for would actually be Harry Styles. Now I'll say why. Particularly with this album, Harry's House, right? I mean, listen, I'm not going to state my opinions on the album because that's not what we're going to do. But a lot of it is really funk-based, at least with the bass lines, and it's like a lot of funk pop. And I think that the original version of Stop Playing Around would go really well with that, but also he has quite a lot of music that's kind of, you can call it pop, but it's more rock adjacent. It's like, I guess, rock pop, you can kind of think of it as that way. And the other 2 songs that were originally going to accompany Stop Playing Around were a bit more rock pop, but if I'm completely honest with you, they're a little bit genre bending. Regardless, I think that because we're similar in age, he's older than me, but because we're similar in age and the music isn't alike, but I think it's close enough, the arenas are close enough, that I think maybe him. The only problem is that man is always on the road, and I don't know if I'm up to that, you know what I mean? So theoretically, in theory, right, I would have to say him. Because I also think about like the other pop girlies, and I actually think we would just be compared too much. Not that I have a problem with comparison, but I would want them to have all the spotlight. I wouldn't want to distract from them. So, yeah, him. Well, isn't this one of the most boringest of boring questions? I think, well, if I'm completely honest, it's a double-edged sword. And the double-edgedness of the sword, I think, comes from the way social media platforms are orchestrated to begin with, right? This whole, like, clickbaity, very fast. It doesn't really give you much chance to digest what you're ingesting. So I feel as though very quickly, the output that people have released has been very sloppy and slodgy, and this I'm talking about people who actually have resources to like dedicate time and effort to make something as hearty and as fulfilling as they possibly can, but they choose not to because, again, the faster or the shorter you can get songs out, or even the shorter that you can make the song itself, the more profitable it is. And again, pair that with the fact that it needs to be really palatable and very kind of, generally about nothing, because the songs that get the most spins are the ones that ask you not to think. And that's not a problem per se, but if you're asking me how I think social media has changed the music industry, definitely. I think music in general has become less philosophical, less spiritual, less about enjoying music and less about enjoying the experiences that music can induce, and more about anything other than that. If I'm completely honest, I don't really pay attention to what people say about what ends up being popular or viral. I think the reason for that is because most of the conversation is actually driven by standom and not really the general public. I think there's a divide between general music listeners and people who have subscribed to the cult of their favorite personality. So yeah, I don't really think that much of anything is being said except for general praise regardless of the quality of what's actually being put out. So it's just conversation that you kind of learn to ignore. But with that being said, things end up being more hyped than they deserve, or things end up being seen as bigger by the standum, and then the general public is like, I've never heard of that, or or even like, why do people like this kind of thing. Music in an odd sense has been divided between those who are easily susceptible to the very fast food nature of music consumption, and those who are just kind of enjoying life and enjoying the experience of music, that they sort of are too slow to catch the current. So I don't know, do with that what you will. I don't really find this conversation particularly interesting, if I can be completely honest with you. I focus on what I'm doing, my lane, and that's really it. Well, my mom is a Gen Xer, so she's very much of the class of the, late 20th century divas. So, Mariah, Whitney, Toni, Patti, Celine. I think out of all of them, though, Whitney is probably her fave. And I don't know, I think any song by her really would probably be considered a favorite of hers, particularly the big singles, because a normie is a normie. But yeah, I think if we're talking about Western pop culture, a favorite song of hers would probably be from her. Anytime a Whitney song would come on, she has to take out the vocals. So, yeah. Listen, when you word a question like this, I'm only thinking of boy bands. And if we're talking about favorite boy bands, sorry. I mean, listen, I am of the 1D era. Like, I was in high school when they debuted. That entire time was crazy, first of all. Do we even have to get into the artists that were like super popular at that point in time? You had 1D, Lorde eventually came out, you had Taylor Swift's 1989, then you had Lana Del Rey, The Neighborhood, Arctic Monkeys. I mean, it was that whole Tumblr era. You know what it was. Well, if you were in high school at that point in time, you knew what it was. So anyway, if we're talking about favorite bands in this context, I'm gonna have to say One Direction, sorry. And my favorite band member from that group, when they were still a thing, sorry, but I was a Zayn girl. Listen, I'm not gonna lie to you. Personally, looking back at all of my favorite 1D songs, they were all songs that had that quintessential Zayn falsetto at the climax of the song. Zayn really elevated their vocal performances. That's not to say that the other guys couldn't sing, because that's definitely not true. I mean, each guy had their thing that they did when they sung together, and it wouldn't be One Direction without all 5 of them. However, I gotta be completely honest with you, Zayn's absence from Made in the AM was palatable. I have to be frank. So yeah, I think when 1D was still a 5-piece band, Zayn was honestly, I can't say the cornerstone, because let's be entirely real. Harry carried those choruses on his back, okay? So a lot of the anthemic aspects of 1D's songs would not be possible with his broadness in terms of his vocal, like the space that his voice took up on a song. It's just a broad voice. However, Zayn really took it. He was like the perfect cherry on top to that entire process. And yeah, he was, for me at least, he was sorely missed on their final album. That final album did have some good songs. Walking in the Wind is hands down, I think it's my second favorite 1D song of all time. So, I'm not going to sit here and bash Made in the AM, because it's a great song. Oh my God, Love You Goodbye. Listen, there's so many songs on that album. However, in my personal opinion, Zayn's presence was missed on the album. Okay, I have two songs that go into this category. The first one immediately came into my head because it was such a breath of fresh air on the song, and that's Ghost by Justin Bieber. You know, Justice overall was, listen, it was an improvement from Changes, mostly because Changes was very uninspired. I love R&B Bieber, but Changes was just so tired. The sound of it, I mean, he was too late to the sound. He needed to do, if he was going to do R&B, he needed to do something inventive, right? He needed to be on his Alia. So Justice as a follow-up to that, you know, because Changes was so, in my personal opinion, sonically abysmal, Justice was going to be an improvement regardless. However, in the grand scheme of things, I felt like he could have done more with Justice. With that being said, I remember when I first listened to Ghost, right? When that acoustic guitar part comes in and his voice is just over top, I was like, that was exactly what we needed. Because, you know, obviously the song is electronic, whatever, and then everything comes out, and then the guitar part starts, and it was like a dose of cold water, and it's like, this was exactly what we needed on this song. So that's the only reason why Ghost was the first song that came into my head. However, if we're talking about acoustic guitar parts on a song that's not an acoustic song, nothing beats Fill Me In by Craig David. Like, that song, geez, one of the tastiest acoustic guitar parts. If you haven't heard the song, please go ahead. That guy was, I'm not going to talk about what we miss about Craig David because, man. But his first two albums, particularly his first album, but even his second album was great. Fill Me In is that girl. Now, I was in middle school when scene was a huge thing, right? But I was way too broke to be a part of the scene culture, and there was no way my mother of color was going to let me dye my hair. With that being said, I've never really wanted to dye my hair. I like my natural hair color. I think that regarding like eras, you know, I do think that maybe I may be one of those artists that might change a hair color or two. Nothing drastic, you know, I'm not someone who thinks I would look good in like something like a drastic like pink or blue or like green or something. I think I would keep it to natural colors, but I might change it a tone or two, right? A hue. But I don't have any color that I aspire to dye my hair to for my personal enjoyment. I'm very, very fine with my dark hair. Truthfully, I find that, you know, when things are going completely awry, I find it difficult to sleep, so I purposely stay up. I stay up until I can't stay awake any longer, and if that means that, you know, I continue my day without having slept, then that's what I do. That's just the tea. If that doesn't count because, you know, sleep is physical, then maybe daydreaming, actually. Like, I wouldn't call it maladaptive daydreaming, but like daydreaming or like getting lost in fantasy, I think actually just kind of like laying down and like fantasizing. Or maybe even, the thing is, what other people would consider, you know, non-physical self-destruction, I probably don't. For example, I like to throw myself into projects and I like to very much be focused on them to the point where, like, you know, I kind of forget that like I have to take care of myself. So that could count if you want it to, but unfortunately, unfortunately. I say unfortunately because honestly, I find that kind of stuff to be really burdensome. I really, if I could, I would just kind of maybe even forcibly release the person from the feelings because I don't want that on my conscience, you know? I'm very picky and I don't really like to date, if I'm completely honest with you. I have my reasons and it's just really burdensome all around, and I find that especially when like someone is around you and is trying to gain your affection without being obvious, but it's obvious to you, and it's like, They might be aware that you are aware of their admiration, and so they kind of want you to give them crumbs, but you're not willing, and then they're kind of mad at you for that, even though they're trying to act like they're not being obvious, etc., etc. It's just it's too much. It's too much. Like, please go away.